This was a day that would go down in history, so it was only fitting that the most powerful person in the world should be there. Queen Victoria was not just a queen of Great Britain and Ireland, but the monarch of a vast empire that spanned the globe. She had even adopted the title of Empress of India, despite the fact that she'd never actually been there. These were different days. As the crowd really realized that they were in the presence of their queen, a woman who reigned over them for more than 60 years, they erupted in wild cheers, throwing their hats into the air. The golden carriage turned to the right to pass through the gates of the museum, and Elsie seized her chance. While the sky was black with hats, she leaped off the branch of the tree and landed on top of the Queen's carriage. With all the noise and commotion, no one seemed to notice this huge breach of security. Elsie lay down flat on the roof of the carriage so she wouldn't be seen. In 1899, anyone getting this close to Her Majesty without an invitation might very well pay the price with their life. The carriage sped into the grounds of the museum, and came to a halt at the bottom of the stone steps. Elsie lifted her head a tiny bit and peeked over the side of the carriage. Thousands of faces were pushed up against the metal railings, open mouths roaring their approval for their queen. The carriage wobbled slightly as Her Majesty stepped out. The queen was old and frail, and tottered up the stone steps. She helped by a handsome Indian man in a turban. She was dressed from head to toe in black and wore a solemn look on her face. That was because she was in deep mourning for her husband, Prince Albert, even though he had died nearly 40 years before. Not wanting to disappoint the crowd, the Queen slowly turned around and gave them a polite wave. While all eyes were on the royal guest, Elsie slid off the roof and lowered herself down the side of the carriage. There she hid behind a wheel. As the carriage shunted backwards a little, Elsie thought she was going to be trampled to death by the horse's hoofs, but the carriage driver cracked his whip and ordered. Elsie let out a sigh of relief as the horses came to a juddering stop. The girl watched from her hiding place as the Queen was greeted with a bow by the director of the museum, the portly Sir Ray Lancaster, and led inside. The huge wooden doors were closed behind her, and now Elsie wasn't feeling too clever. All around her she could see the legs of the policeman. How was she going to get inside the museum without anyone seeing her? She was desperate to do so, but Elsie had more chance of becoming the next Archbishop of Canterbury. As she pondered her next move on her hands and knees, the most unexpected thing happened, and the carriage moved, leaving the girl hiding behind nothing at all. She was concealed only by some air. Air is one of the worst things to find yourself hiding behind. Other bad ones include a conker, a marble, a rabbit dropping, a pea, a wasp, a flea, a speck of dust, the invisible man. Elsie was in deep, deep trouble. The crowd outside the Natural History Museum all laughed when the little urchin was revealed hiding behind the air. The policeman looked around in confusion. The crowd the crowd pointed at the girl, and eventually the policeman saw what was right under their noses. They formed a circle around this uninvited guest and began closing in on her. Having lived on the streets, Elsie was no stranger to running away from the police, or the "rozzers," as those who spent most of their time running away from the police called them. The policemen crouched down and stretched out their arms, sure that she would try to escape by running through their legs. "We've got you," growled the chief police, Commissioner Barker. He was a heavy man with a tiny postage stamp of a moustache stuck over his top lip. The circle was closing, and the policeman linked his arms to make themselves into a human net. There was no way out. Spotting the truncheons dangling from their belt, a daring thought crossed Elsie's mind. Just as the policeman was looming over her, she grabbed two of the truncheons with each hand, yanking them as hard as she could. This brought the policemen crashing down towards one another, their headlocks knocked together. Dazed and confused, the policeman tumbled backwards and collapsed onto the ground. From above, the scene looked like a flower, with Elsie in the centre and the policemen all splayed out in petals. This brilliant move by the urchin instantly won over the crowd, and they cheered. No one wanted to see an army of policemen win against one little mite. However, there was no time to lap up the attention of the crowd. Elsie darted up the steps towards the entrance of the Natural History Museum. Another squad of policemen stood guard in front of the huge wooden doors. They drew their truncheons, ready to give this little creature a ruddy good bashing. No, not wanting to receive bashing, be it a good or bad one, Elsie slid down the drain pipe. There was no time to think. With her monkey feet, Elsie was soon halfway up it. The crowd cheered once more, and one bold policeman gave chase up the drain pipe. But not being blessed with monkey feet, he instantly slid back down. His bottom landed right on top of another policeman's face. Needless to say, this perfect piece of slapstick was greeted by howls of laughter from the crowd. "After her, you fools," barked Sergeant Barker. "Right away, Commissioner," said one. "Form a ladder," ordered the Commissioner. "How are we going to do that?" "Heaviest at bottom." "That's very kind of you, sir." Barker fumed. His tiny moustache twitched. "I'm not part of the ladder. I'm in charge. Now, the heaviest at the bottom, then the next heaviest, then the next, and so on and so forth." The policemen all started arguing among themselves. No one wanted to be at the bottom. "I'm the lightest. No, I'm the lightest." They argued for ages. The girl was nearing the top of the drain pipe. The Commissioner took charge of his human ladder and quickly ordering who went there. Soon the policemen were reluctantly climbing on top of one another. Needless to say, this amateur acrobatics act immediately came crashing to the ground. "Help! Someone's treading on me!" The crowd cheered at this brilliant piece of entertainment. By this time Elsie had reached the roof of the museum. She took a moment to acknowledge her adoring audience and gave them a little bow. The crowd burst into wild applause. The little girl hurried over the sloping roofs to the far side of the building, her monkey feet gripping the lead. For a moment, looking over the rooftops of London, she felt immortal. However, when a towel slipped from under her, she suddenly felt distinctly mortal. The towel exploded onto the ground. Instantly, Elsie slammed down onto the roof and began sliding down it at speed. The girl rolled it over in desperate attempt to grab onto the roof. Just as she was about to fly off, she managed to hook her fingers around the guttering. However, Elsie was going so fast, she swung forward. Her fingers unhooked and she felt herself hurtling through the air. Elsie flew forward and burst through a stained glass window. She rolled down some steps before landing on top of a glass cabinet that housed the skeleton of a saber-toothed tiger. Elsie came down with such a force that the sheet of glass on which she landed on began to crack. Like a shaft of lightning splintering through the sky, the crack shot across the glass. In a split second, the glass panel at the top of the cabinet misted over as it became 1,000 tiny pieces. Elsie knew exactly what was going to happen next, but was powerless to stop it. She gulped. The glass crumbled beneath her, and Elsie fell into the cabinet, landing on the back of the saber-toothed tiger. Now the girl was trapped inside the glass cabinet, and with all the noise from the window smashing, she was sure to have drawn attention to herself. If only there was some way of breaking one of the glass walls, but they were inches thick. However hard she thumped her fist, it wouldn't break. Feeling that there was little chance of the saber-toothed tiger skeleton missing it, she pulled out one of its saber-toothed teeth. With an almighty swing of her arm, she bashed the sharp end of the tooth against the glass. It immediately splintered, and the tiny pieces of glass showered down like rain. Not needing the tooth anymore, Elsie stuck it back where she'd found it, and patted the saber-toothed tiger skeleton in thanks. The sound of footsteps echoed along the corridor. It must be the museum's head of security, Mr. Clout. Elsie knew she had to make a run for it. Having no shoes on her feet, she carefully stepped over the pieces of broken glass and charged off down the corridor. staying close to the walls and keeping out of the light, something she had learned from the rats at the orphanage. She found a balcony overlooking the main hall. From the top of the floor of the museum, Elsie looked down at the historic scene.